Hello, and welcome to a short box from Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zeckthar, and this week we'll be concluding the Siege of Medusa.
Well, folks, we made it to the end of Medusa V's history. But who wins in this great battle? Well, for the Imperial forces on Medusa V, both the Space Marines and the Loyalist Imperial Guard troops proved to be the ultimate victors of the Medusa V campaign. Though the planet itself could not be saved from the ravages of the Van Groth warp storm, much of the Loyalist civilian population was successfully evacuated from the doomed world. In addition to successful civilian evacuations, many of the planet's sacred sites were defended to the bitter end, and the Chaos Sorcerer Zeckthar's plan to attain demonhood was thwarted. Such a victory came at a terrible cost, however, with many guardsmen and space marines, led by Lord Marshal Graf Herazon, choosing to remain on the planet to deny the enemies of the Imperium anything of value until the warp storm claimed them all. Now, for the Eldari, they were successful as well in closing the webway portals, but their losses were heavy, including the loss of Autarch Alaric Swiftblade of the craftworld Aleatok. However, Swiftblade's death was not in vain, as she was able to earn her vengeance and personally behead the sorcerer Zeckthar before being slain herself by his bodyguard of Black Legion Chaos Space Marine veterans. Now, needless to say, Zeckthar's plans to ascend to demonhood were foiled. Kinda hard to obtain demonhood without a head. With Zeckthar slain, those champions of the Dark Gods who followed him were left to their fates on the dying world as the warp consumed them. Of all the combatants, the Warriors of Chaos claimed ultimate defeat, much to the chagrin of the ruinous powers. Now, as for the Drukhari, Noeke and her followers were successful in capturing a huge number of human slaves from Medusa V to bring back to the dark city of Kamarach within the webway. Upon her return, Noeke entered the Hall of Blood in the Dark Tower of Asdrubal Vecht in order to unseat him, only to find herself, and those loyal to her, betrayed by the wily Lord of the Cabal of the Black Heart and those who served him. Surrounded by Vecht's forces, Noeke was forced to make a fighting retreat from Kamarach. With what remnants of her forces survived Vecht's ambush, the ultimate fate of the Daughter of Pain remains unknown, though if she is still alive, it can be sure that she is seeking a new means to seize control of the Dark City. Now, another apparent winner of this debacle was the boys. The Maroon Space Hulk Scylla, which the Orc forces had attempted to repair so they could flee from Medusa V before it was destroyed, was lost. Attacks from both Imperial and Chaos forces, including a murky pestilence left behind by Chaos Plague Marines, sent Nazdreg and his boys looking for another way to escape the planet. Nazdreg actually came up with a, by Orcish standards, truly brilliant escape plan. The Orcs commandeered a slightly damaged Imperial transport, the Minnow, and managed to get it into orbit. Nazdreg left several captured humans alive to fly the Minnow and transmit a false distress call. The orbiting Imperial battleship, Terra's Defiance, received the communication and came to the transport's assistance, only to be boarded and taken over by the Orcs. Although the disappearance of the Terra's Defiance was noted by the Imperial Navy, Nazdreg Urtgrub managed to escape with many of his boys against all odds. It is likely that he will eventually turn up elsewhere in the galaxy to trouble the servants of the Emperor once more, now with an Imperial battleship, suitably modified to Orcish tastes, of course, at his disposal. Now, it turns out I found the wily Orc popping up in the Damocles sector, causing all sorts of mischief to the Farsight enclaves towards the end of the War of Dhaka. After hearing about the war, Nazdreg was determined to show
his boys were shootier than an upstart Tau.
After a temporary parley with Badrek's freebooters in the Trugruk system, the Orc warboss Nazdreg turned his war towards the Farsight enclaves. In addition to wanting a good scrap, the warboss had heard of the Storm Surge battlesuit and was intent on building one into a Stompa. So it came to be that Commander Farsight and his Tau forces found their world beset by Orc forces. Nazdreg was able to establish strongholds on both sides of the Damocles Gulf, and recruited as many mech boys as possible to build him many advanced weapon systems. In the cataclysmic battles that followed, the Orcs devastated the Tau in both land and space. Farsight was forced to introduce a new doctrine dubbed the Way of the Short Blade, which sought to engage the Orcs in point-blank firefights and hit-and-run tactics. Farsight further created a specialist recovery corps of aircast pilots and earthcast engineers to strip every battlefield of wreckage to prevent the orcs from salvaging scrap to produce more weapons. The lack of scrap caused many frustrated and disinterested mechs to quit Nazdreg's warg. This allowed Farsight to finally introduce his killing blow against Nazdreg and his lieutenants. Despite the ferocious orc counterattacks, the war had firmly turned against them, and they lost many strongholds in the Damocles Gulf. Yet, always one with great survival instincts, Nazdreg fled across the gulf to his stronghold on Dregrock. At the same time, he commanded his remaining mech boys to create their greatest weapon yet. Nazdreg intended to introduce a scorched earth policy to annihilate the worlds of the Gulf if he could not have them. On the world of Werborg, a mob of mechs managed to create a powerful teleporter and force field weapon known as the Telefragger that could rip apart anything in its path. Nazdreg was most pleased and intended to upscale this weapon and mount them on an armada of vessels to purge the Damocles Gulf. However, Farsight discovered the orc plans after his forces captured Werborg. Forced to abandon his previous plan to regroup his forces and wait before launching the final strike at Dregrock, Farsight instead immediately set to end Nazdreg before he could put his plan into motion. Meanwhile, Nazdreg gathered trillions of orcs to his cause, creating a wave of disorder and infighting as he sought to complete his force of Telefraggers. The war boss would have to launch an attack soon in order to retain control of his warg. As the orcs labored on Dregrock, Tau gunships suddenly appeared in the skies, and their warships unleashed a bombardment that disabled the greenskin space elevators to prevent reinforcements from reaching their docked ships in orbit. Using the mayhem as cover, the Tau managed to land substantial ground forces with the intention to strike directly at Dreg City. Led by Pathfinders and stealth battlesuits, the Tau knocked out several power generators to disable greenskin anti-air defenses, allowing for waves of heavy landing craft to enter unopposed. These forces now pushed deeper into Dreg City, hammering the orcs with massive firepower. Nazdreg knew time was on his side, though, and focused only on the northern battle against the largest Tau concentration. It was here the war boss believed that Farsight was leading from the front, engaging the Stompa mob of Skragafunda Stomp with heavy battlesuits. However, as Nazdreg departed aboard his personal battle fortress, Gitkrusha, Farsight instead set down from a manta directly in Dreg City. Alongside the Eight, Farsight targeted the Telefraggers under construction. Meanwhile, Nazdreg arrived at the front, and when he did not see Farsight present, quickly realized he had been outwitted. Seeking to immediately return back to Dreg City, he activated the shock projector aboard the Gitkrusha to make the trip instantaneous. A green portal emerged 20 meters above the Telefragger construction yards, and through it, orc reinforcements flowed through, including the Gitkrusha itself. The sudden attack surprised the Tau, and most of the Eight took damage. Farsight ordered Shavestos to lead the Telefragger attack, while he and Bravestorm dealt with Nazdreg and the Gitkrusha. The duo quickly landed upon the Gitkrusha and came into combat with Nazdreg himself. Farsight was nearly backed into a corner by Nazdreg and his knobs, but this too had been a distraction to allow for Bravestorm to disable the battle fortress's shock projectors. Bravestorm destroyed the projectors and along with Farsight leapt into the sky as Gitkrusha imploded from the aftershock. Nazdreg was thought dead, and in the aftermath, the orcs on Dregrock quickly folded. Thus, Farsight and his fellows claimed victory. Unfortunately for the Tau, the Gitkrusha didn't actually implode. Although it looked like it did, it actually disappeared into a portal that was caused by the destruction of its shock projectors. After this debacle, I can't really say what happened to Nazdreg, but I'm sure he's gearing up for his next big scrap. And I'll bet the Tau are hoping it's not with them. Now, speaking of the Tau, their expedition's goal on Medusa V, to gather information about the warp so they could advance their research into the development of more effective warp drives, was largely successful. However, an analysis of the gathered data and the terrible fates of those Tau who remained behind when the warp storm took Medusa V caused Earthcast scientists to believe that further research into the nature of the warp would be infeasible. The fourth sphere expansion of the Tau Empire was thus delayed in order to further consolidate the recent third sphere expansion. There were great losses for the Tau on Medusa V, personified by the heroic death of Commander Shadowsun's sibling, Shas el Tyres. The the leader of the Firecast warriors on the world. Ironically, many humans from Medusa willingly joined the Tau Empire during the campaign simply to receive the Tau's protection from the other deadly factions rampaging across the world's surface. Now, of these Xenos they wished to escape from, none were more feared than the Tyranids. Yet, the disorganized Tyranid swarms of Medusa V were unable to make any headway in taking the planet. Imperial officers believed that the sheer diversity of opponents that they faced from multiple different species and cultures contributed to the inability of the Tyranids to make any progress. A Death Leaper Lictor, which the Splinter Hive fleet had sought to claim, was captured by Imperial forces and has since vanished. Imperial investigations hint that the Death Leaper escaped from the Inquisition's Ordo Xenos into space aboard an Imperial freighter, killed the crew, and then fled aboard a second Imperial ship which came to investigate. The Hive fleet orbiting the planet became inanimate bioship hulks, floating aimlessly, apparently abandoned by the Hive mind to their fates in the warp storm. Now, of all the combatants, the only people who had a plan to weather the storm, other than Chaos who wanted to become the storm, were the Necrons. Unfortunately for them, they were unable to construct the great pylons in order to erect a null shield around Medusa V. The Medusan Necron Lord, the Herald of the Storm, was left behind on the dying planet, cursed by the Catan known as the Deceiver himself, to remain for as long as the planet endured in the warp, after which the Deceiver would return to administer the true punishments. The remainder of the Necron forces were teleported away, along with the Deceiver to plague the peoples of the galaxy elsewhere. Well, folks, there you have it, the exciting conclusion to the Siege of Medusa V. Tune in next week for, well, I don't know what. I've kind of ran out of ideas for what topic I should cover in my short foxes. Now, I'm sure I'll come up with something by next week, but I would love to hear what you guys want me to talk about. Just leave your ideas in the comments and I'll see what I can do. Now, if you enjoyed this Vox, feel free to like, follow, subscribe, and comment. Have a great day, and as always,
Until next time, this is Zeckthar, signing off.